joining us for this month's steering committee meeting. We've got Josh Palmieri here from the ADUs in Denver program to give us a presentation about what that is doing, and then we will have some time for some discussion around ADU issues in your Southeast. Then I'll give an update on upcoming engagement activities and where we're focusing those efforts. Have a few landscaping issues we want to talk about, and then go over the results of the in-person meeting poll that we sent out. So that's our agenda for this evening. Unless anyone has any objections, we'll go ahead and get started with the ADUs in Denver presentation. So I'll hand it over to Josh.
All right, yeah, thanks, Scott. Let me take over screen real quick. Looking good. Okay. Yeah.
Looks good.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Josh Palmieri. I'm a senior city planner with CPD. I work with Scott and Libby and Jason, and I'm currently project managing the ADUs in Denver project. So yeah, let's just be really clear. Hopefully everyone has a good idea by now, but what an ADU is. It is an accessory dwelling unit. It's the acronym ADU, which means that it's not a separate property. It cannot be sold separately from the main property. It must be accessory to the primary structure, which in this case, for now, has to be a single unit dwelling. It is essentially a self-contained living space with its own kitchen, bathroom, sleeping areas, living quarters, things like that. Folks often call them granny flats, backyard cottages, in-law suites. They can be attached or detached. So it can be, in the form of an attic loft, or it could be a basement unit that's been converted. It could also be an addition to an existing structure. So like, the middle examples of expansion or extension of an existing home. And it can also be a detached structure that stands on its own. It's currently only allowed as accessory to a primary single unit dwelling use, which we'll go into more detail later. But we, the city, Denver, defines an ADU very clearly in the code that it must be on the same zone lot as a primary single unit dwelling use. And it is also defined as a accessory use allowance. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that means as we move on. But to be really clear, we want to make sure that this project, you understand that this project is not actually rezoning any properties to allow ADUs. A lot of people think that this means, after we adopt this, that the next day they can go build an ADU. And that's not the case. We're looking specifically at what you can build when you are zoned for an ADU. So we do still have that language, that recommendation in Blueprint Denver that says accessory dwelling units are appropriate in all residential zone districts throughout the city, but we're still leaving that process, which is called a rezoning. We're leaving that up to individual property owners to come forth and say, yes, I want this. I want to rezone my property. We're also leaving it up to processes like this. The neighborhood planning process could recommend in the plan that the entire X neighborhood or the entire area wants ADUs. We can get that language in there if appropriate. Or we're also leaving it up to individual city council members to help do legislative rezonings in which they can bring forth an entire neighborhood up to whatever it might be, 3, 6, 10,000 properties if need be. So what this project is doing, as I mentioned, is we're looking at removing barriers to accessory dwelling unit construction. We also want to make sure that they fit in with different neighborhood contexts. So looking in this area, more the suburban context idea where neighborhoods don't have alley access. The lots are a little bit bigger, maybe a little misshapen in some ways, a lot of triangle lots and interesting corners. We really want to make sure that the ADU that's allowed in those areas fits the context and is appropriate. So at the end of the project, we will propose recommendations to City Council to adopt new rules in the Denver zoning code. It's an amendment to the code, and those rules will dictate the size, shape, and location of future ADUs. A lot of folks ask, why we're doing this work. And we know that as the city grows, the way people are living is changing, especially the past 2 years with work from home opportunities and housing costs, et cetera. We know that folks are looking for a little bit more space, maybe a little bit more flexibility on their property, but a lot of folks are also looking for ways to just stay in the neighborhood that they love with taxes increasing, things like that. We see ADUs as a way for folks to help generate income, help to reinvest in the property that they already own, and hopefully stay in a neighborhood that they know and love. We feel it's a great advantage, strategy to actually fight displacement in a way, and the fact that you're able to reinvest in your property. You're able to create new or missing housing options. There's a lot of potential neighborhoods, in your plan area that only consist of maybe 3 or 4 bedroom homes, and someone that's just looking to rent potentially a 1 bedroom or a 2 bedroom house, that option doesn't really exist. So we see ADUs as a way to open up more of those housing options, which go along with our broader citywide goals. ADUs have lots of benefits with them, one of them being cost. Technically, there's no real land cost associated with it. It's typically built by the homeowner. Some of those use restrictions will look at mean that the owner must live on the property, and they're more efficient as far as using existing resources. The streets are already there, a lot of the infrastructure. And, land prices in Denver have skyrocketed in the past decade. We're seeing the smallest parcel in the city sell for $250,000 at this point, just for land. We also know that, there's interest is growing. ADU applications for rezonings have been increasing since 2010, since we technically re-legalized them, especially in 2019, since the adoption of that Blueprint Denver language. We've seen even more people become interested, and more folks in suburban contexts are becoming interested in these sort of opportunities as well. We also know that, Denver's growing. It's going to continue to grow. We've grown by almost 150,000 people in the last 10 years, and we were going to grow by another approximately 150,000 people in the next 20 years. So processes like this, planning process, are very important. And we just think ADUs can be one tool to help combat some of that, absorb some of that growth. We also know we're in a housing crisis. Denver's quoted to be something like 60,000 housing units short. Prices have just gone up, up, up. We're all feeling the impacts. And Denver's, what the latest article was, we're like the 5th most expensive city in the country, only behind places like LA, San Francisco, Miami, things like that. So things need to be done, and we think ADUs can be one tool to help address that. So this is building on guidance from the Comp Plan 2040, but also Blueprint Denver, which was just adopted in 2019. And we're directly implementing this recommendation from the land use and build forms section of Blueprint Denver, the housing section, which is recommendation number 5, which says to remove barriers to constructing accessory dwelling units, but also create those context-sensitive building form standards. There's some other points about implementation here, but these are the big goals. So this is what we're tackling in this project. We also know that, ADUs have really kind of always been a part of Denver since it was a place to begin with. The example of the Sheedy Mansion here in 1892. It's technically in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, I believe, but you can see that to this day, the accessory unit, the separate structure that was built along with it, is still standing on Grant Street. A lot of our historic neighborhoods, you can see examples of ADUs that were built around the same period, late 1800s, in the form of carriage homes. Places like Baker, Curtis Park, Platt Park, you might see quite a few in some of those alleys. So we hear a lot of things about where ADUs are allowed. People throw out quotes and numbers like 25% of the city allows them. And yes, technically this map shows where ADUs are allowed throughout the city at this moment. But you'll see places like downtown being lit up here in the red. So like technically in any zoning district that's greater than single unit, so like that is to say where a duplex can be built or where a row home can be built, technically an ADU can be built there as well if there's a single unit home on the property. But we know that, there's not a lot of single family homes on the 16th Street Mall, so it doesn't feel very accurate to sort of think of the allowance in this way. The more accurate depiction is sort of this map. So this is looking just at single unit districts in the city of Denver. So everything lit up is single unit. Only in the yellow is where a single unit currently allows an accessory dwelling unit with it. So everything in the blue does not allow ADUs at this time. But, we're just thinking of the idea of this is where people really want to build them to, grow their property, continue to stay in these neighborhoods. So this reveals approximately about 10% of single unit districts that are allowing them. Here's a map of where they have been built. So of course, since 2010, since we sort of re-legalized them, reintroduced them to the code, they've been built just in those neighborhoods where they were allowed. So you're seeing a lot of Berkeley, a bit at Platt Park, pockets of Baker, Curtis Park, a little bit in Cole and Whittier, things like that, more central city locations. But we've only seen about 400 ADUs permitted since 2010. So in this 12-year time frame, it hasn't been a huge influx. And so in this project, we really want to get to the root of that and see what's causing such few of them. It looks like we have 2 in this planning area, maybe 1 in Virginia Village, 1 in Indian Creek there. So ADUs are regulated just like any other building form, any other building that you were to construct on your property, similar to like a garage, or if you were to build a new house, it has all the rules associated with it. ADUs are currently one of the most restrictive building forms because of those sort of use limitations associated with it, paired with some square footage limitations, the height limitations, setbacks, and things like that. And so these are some of the things that we're really looking at in this project to see what should change and what can make it a little bit easier to build, what is an actual barrier to construction. Currently, in single unit districts, the owner must live on the property for their ADU, for the accessory dwelling unit use to be allowed. So as long as you live full-time on the property, you're allowed to rent it out long-term or short-term, just like any other piece of your property, just like a bedroom in your house. But as soon as you actually move off of the property, technically the accessory dwelling use is no longer allowed. And so you have to do, one of 2 things. You either have to sell the property, sell it to someone else that will live there permanently and can continue that use, or you would have to essentially decommission the use of the ADU. So you would have to remove gas lines, or not necessarily demolish the structure, but you would have to decommission its operable use as a dwelling unit. So some of those barriers that we're looking at from what we've heard from the committee and just from the public in general, folks that have built ADUs, are things like the size limitations. ADUs are restricted by your lot size. We have 3 thresholds. So depending on how big your lot is, you can do 650 square feet or up to 1,000 square feet on the largest properties. It has a height limitation. The height is limited in 1.5 stories, which is a tricky nuance, which means that the upper story, that is to say the second floor, can only be 75% of the lower floor. And so we see a lot of folks actually end up building a larger ground floor than they would really like to. So that means if you want 750 square feet of ADU on your second floor, you have to build 1,000 square feet below as garage or potentially some other use. And so there's some tricks there. There's some issues with reuse of existing structures. We'd love for folks to use more of what's already built. It's the most sustainable thing to do, is to reuse a building that already exists, like a garage, and potentially convert that to an ADU. But zoning does get in the way in some levels. We require that the existing structure meet all the new requirements for setbacks for an ADU. And so if your existing garage isn't 5 feet away from your side yard setback, your neighbor's property, or if it's not 5 feet from the alley, you're not allowed to convert it. You basically have to demolish that structure, unfortunately. And we know that in the suburban context, there's not the appropriate zoning districts for ADUs. We only have 1 district on the books, and it doesn't apply to most of our suburban areas. So we're looking at modifying those standards. Finally, looking at some of that context piece, we're looking really closely at how an ADU should differ. So should an urban ADU, look different than a suburban ADU? We've been hearing that, yes, the rules currently are the same citywide. So that same height allowance of 24 feet, 1.5 stories doesn't change depending on your neighborhood. And we're hearing that, it very much should. So we're looking really closely at what that means in those contexts. We're looking closely at the data about single units. We have roughly 30,000 single unit parcels per context that we're looking at. So suburban, urban edge, and urban is where most of our single unit zoning exists in the city. It's roughly about 100,000 parcels citywide. And currently only about 18,500 single unit parcels are allowed to have ADUs. And, we've only seen 400 of those built, so not a ton yet. But looking closely at those contexts, this is something we're doing in our committee, is really studying the appropriateness, making sure we can right size ADUs per context. The average urban lot size comes in around 6,000 square feet versus the suburban average lot size, which is much closer to like 10,000 feet. It's interesting to look at these things, at the same scale and kind of in this perspective of what's built today. So this is kind of the existing average sample from these contexts versus what can be built in the future and what should be allowed. And so your primary allowance generally is much greater than what you would see on the ground today. We see the primary allowance bulk plane, which is to say this is what would be allowed if you were to demolish the existing structure and build a brand new home. You could build something that fit within this envelope. There's differences amongst height, and there's some nuance in the code that dictates how tall you can be, but roughly 2.5, a 3-story up to 35-foot tall primary structure is allowed on most properties throughout the city. We know we're seeing not as many of those in the suburban context, but there are a few examples of newer construction where people really do take advantage of that full allowance. And so we really want to ask the question, what's appropriate in context, comparing what could be built there in the future. And we want to ask that while looking at accessory dwelling units as well. So you can see the comparison here based on that lot size, based on context, that an urban lot would yield something like a 650 square foot ADU, which may or may not feel appropriate. We're asking those questions among the committee versus the suburban ADU allowance, which would be 1,000 square feet, but looking at that on a 10,000 square foot lot and how that feels. And also comparing that to, the other things that can be built in the suburban context. So looking at what the current garage allowance is, it's 17 feet, 1,000 square foot citywide with its associated setbacks there. That's the rule that's on the books citywide. But the primary structure, could be something like this middle lot. It could be 35 feet. It could be pushed all the way back to 20 feet from the rear of the property with 7.5 foot setbacks versus the current rules that we have on the books for an ADU, which is 24 feet tall, 1.5 stories with 5 and 5 foot setbacks. So we're really looking closely at what this means in each context and what feels appropriate, but keeping an eye on, what else could be there. Through the committee, we're hearing about a lot of the issues. We're currently wrapping up the exploring the issues phase, but we've heard a lot about the impacts on neighbors and communities, things like privacy, backyard privacy being an important one, parking, making sure the ADU fits the neighborhood context, things like displacement. We're hearing a lot about the design, construction, and buildability issues, things that get in the way, some of those barriers that I mentioned, like the minimum square footage, the minimum lot size requirement for some of these structures, accessibility issues, reuse of structures. We're hearing a lot about cost concerns, how much it costs to build one, and then how much it'll cost to rent beyond that. And we're also hearing a lot about how they're going to be used, the use and use allowances associated with ADUs. So we are tasked with allowing ADUs with more than single unit, which doesn't necessarily affect, this area that much. I think it's like, less than 10% of your entire planning area is greater than single unit. But looking at that ownership piece of ADUs, should someone be required to sell their property if they move away, or do they have to demolish the ADU, or decommission that ADU. We want to look closely at what that means and should we be removing those units from the market. Also other uses that are allowed in them, like home office and some ideas on short-term rental. But yeah, so we are just wrapped up our third committee meeting. We're currently wrapping up those explore the issues phase. We're here in May. And so we have an advisory committee of 23 members. Councilwoman Black is on our committee representing this planning area well. But we've got a diverse group of stakeholders and folks that are well-informed, but lots of experience and lots of different backgrounds. We do have a public survey that's out now, so we'd love for you to partake in that. Give us your feedback, where we ask a lot of questions about concerns, what to worry about, also what you'd like to build, what you'd like to see in your neighborhood. And you can take that on our project website, denvergov.org/text amendments. But we'll also have 2 more public outreach components down the line. We're also assembling some focus groups where we'll look at more specific topics, like in the suburban context, where it is unique compared to other lots throughout the city. You can also sign up to join, show some interest in joining those focus groups by joining our email list, which is also on the project website. But we're looking at 8 entire committee meetings, wrapping those up in October, and hopefully looking at adoption early next spring with those new rules. That's all I have for us, but yeah, I'm happy to take questions or go back in any more slides over detail. It's a lot of content, but I'm happy to discuss.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Anyone have any questions for Josh about the ADUs in Denver project? Christopher.
I've always wondered, in most cities, well, a lot of cities do this, but what's the magic about keeping it a rental? You know, in the environment we're in, you know, people are always looking for some kind of attainable housing, and not saying this is the best alternative, but why is it always focused that it has to be for rent and you couldn't condominiumize it if you wanted to sell it?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are good examples in other cities, like famously Portland allows their ADUs to be sold off, Vancouver as well. It's tricky for us because it's tied to our use limitations. It's tied to the definitions of how it is defined and used. And so it'd be difficult to go that route. I mean, we've heard a lot of concerns about lot sizes and property values and neighborhood character and things like that. So we don't foresee that concept being part of this project's scope, but I think it's something that other cities are doing. They've seen some decent success with them, and maybe, you know, in Denver's long-term future, it could be an option.
Anyone else with questions about the ADU project? Lisa.
Hello. I was wondering, was the original idea to limit to 1.5 stories, did it have to do with the bulk plane so that the ADU wouldn't appear too massive on a small urban lot?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, those rules were adopted in 2010, so I wasn't around then at the city, but I mean, the bulk plane effectively does the same thing. It's sort of a belt and suspenders approach in a way. The bulk plane does, to my understanding, appropriately, you know, allow sunlight more or less to access your neighboring property to make sure that the building is shaped like a building with a pitch roof, you know, ideally not blocking your entire neighbor's access to sunlight to the north of you. But the 1.5 limitation, I'm not sure. I mean, it cuts into the form in another way. So yeah, I think conceptually it does potentially reduce the mass of the structure, but we're hearing that it just becomes a complicated thing to design for, to actually figure out, and really becomes a cost barrier in a lot of ways. You have to do a lot of just funny jogs, and you need to do more joints and connections. You need more gutters, and all that stuff adds up over time. So we're actually getting structures that, you know, are 2 stories, appear as 2 stories, but are 25% less than a 2-story on the second level. And so we're trying to figure out if, yeah. if we're
Yeah,
getting the benefit.
you see like in the, kind of, Wash Park areas, kind of maybe within a mile of Wash Park, the whole neighborhood characters changing, and the houses are very large, close together, and they build enormous detached garages in the back that are 3-car garages, and then they have a sliver of a sidewalk to get to their back door with their groceries, and maybe a swing set with a swing.
Yeah.
So when you see something like that, and that's a permitted use, it seems kind of odd that we're restricting, the sizes to that extent, because what's the real difference there? I mean, I understand the impacts of other people living in your neighborhood, and that's scary because it's not 2 more cars, but I guess I'm hoping that you have success in trying to open up the opportunities and alternatives that people can do.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that.
Sure, go ahead.
Josh, thanks for the presentation. Super helpful, density of information and clarity. So my question would be, does it feel like that it's, excuse me, the more cost that's a barrier, or is it zoning, or is it a little chicken and the egg? But if you were to try to make your best, obviously educated guess, is it that people want to do it but can't afford it because of the zoning, or is that people can't get it through zoning, and so regardless of the cost, they're not going to incur it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, some things like the minimum lot size requirement, famously, like just last year, Councilwoman Sandoval rezoned the Sloan Lake neighborhood, which was about, I don't know, what was it, 1,500 parcels, 1,500 properties to allow ADUs. But of those 1,500 properties, about 500 of them didn't meet the minimum zone lot requirement. And so they were just under the square footage, varying, of course, but even if you're 10 or 12 feet under the square footage that you need, you're not allowed an ADU. And so right off the bat, that becomes a barrier to, you're not allowed to do a detached unit. You're allowed to do an attached accessory dwelling unit in that case. But the more popular, thing that people would like to do is have that separation of space potentially for a long-term tenant. They were just, it's not an option for them. And so we're looking at those zoning barriers to start. And yeah, a lot of the zoning requirements do trickle into the cost, like this potential 1.5 story limitation, potential lot coverage issues. We exempt vehicular storage from lot coverage. So that is to say, if you build a garage, you're allowed to exempt 50% of the square footage of the garage up to 500 square feet from your lot coverage. And you're allowed to do that for an ADU only if you provide parking. And so we're sort of incentivizing the more expensive 2-story ADU. We're making it more difficult to build a 1-story ADU with those limitations. And so it's definitely a chicken or egg scenario, and we're looking at tackling them all.
And just to be clear, you said that it looked like, according to your map, there's been 2 in the whole southeast area. It looked like 1 in Virginia Village and 1 in Indian Creek. So do you guys have on record people who have applied for zoning and been denied, or do you only have like success, or do you also have people who have tried and not succeeded?
We do. We have 1 case denied to date. So we're at a 99.9% success rate or so. But yes, the 1 denial was in a suburban context district, and they were having difficulties matching a zoning district. As I mentioned, the suburban context only has the 1 district. And so council felt it didn't apply fully and didn't feel appropriate to apply it to a different size lot. And so we're looking at writing the correct standards for those zone districts through this process and hoping to open up more opportunities in the suburban context.
Thank you.
Erica, go ahead.
Thank you. The biggest barrier from my point of view is the whole, if you weren't the owner living there, that you wouldn't be able to have the ADU anymore. That to me would be the biggest barrier, because I think in my situation, I have a single family home. If I ever wanted to say, put something in the backyard for my parents as they age or something like that, that would be something that would be really relatable to me. But I would probably hesitate to do it knowing that, if they passed away or something in it, or maybe we sold our house, we wouldn't be able to rent both our house, or I'm sorry, if we moved out of our house, we wouldn't be able to rent our house and our ADU. That would be really unappealing to me. Mm-hmm. So that to me would be one of the biggest barriers from my point of view. Is there any, I know you said that you guys are working on talking about that, but is there any movement, do you think, on that point? What would be the rationale of not allowing somebody to rent if you were renting both the home and the ADU?
Yeah, it's something that we're just starting to touch on. I mean, we're only 3 meetings in, but I think the concern would be the idea of sort of speculative development, that developers would come into a neighborhood, buy up a single family home, build an ADU, and then effectively turn that into 2 rentals, right? Turning into a double rental property versus a single rental property. They're allowed to rent out the primary today. And so I think there's just fear about potentially having distant landlords or that sort of scenario.
Okay, thank you.
Lupe, go ahead.
Yes, I think I saw a news article actually last night that was on 9 News regarding ADUs, and there's an added component to this, which is not only are neighborhoods now starting to accept this as a greater opportunity to provide alternate means of living, but is there also a means of which those who are looking for assistance in the cost can actually apply for grants or apply for some type of a break, if you will, tax break or otherwise, if they were to bring on an ADU onto their property?
Yeah. So the program you're talking about specifically is the West Denver Renaissance Collaborative. It's a housing nonprofit, and they have a program specifically set up for those West Denver neighborhoods where they're working with Habitat for Humanity to help build the actual ADUs and help house folks that are in need and lower income, and giving the actual homeowner very low cost loans and low construction costs in order to do so. And so, yeah, their program is doing really well over there. They're looking at expanding that a little bit larger. And I know HOST, our housing office's sustainability, is looking at expanding some of those grant opportunities as well. It's still pretty new. It's basically a pilot program, but yeah, those options are growing in number. So.
And sorry, I had one more question, and that is the opportunity to kind of welcome in kind of prefabricated options where they drop onto a pad that's already been poured with all the utilities. Is that something that is being allowed as well?
Yeah, I mean, as long as it fits within the zoning rules, it's more difficult effectively to meet the building code requirements in that sense. I mean, any structure that's built has to meet, current life and safety codes, but one of the biggest catches for folks is the foundation. Our foundation requirements are pretty strict because of our climate, our freeze thaw issues. So you have to have a 36-inch deep footing that the structure is tied to. And so you're not allowed to do a mobile structure, nothing that's on wheels. It must be tied to a permanent secure foundation. And as long as whatever's above ground meets, insulation and fire code requirements, it would be allowed.
Great, thank you.
Erica, did you have another question, or is your hand just still up?
Nope, just forgot to lower my hand. Thank you.
That's all right. So Josh mentioned some of the issues around ADUs in suburban zone districts that they're looking at. But while we have them here, I wanted to ask if there are any other issues you all are concerned about or have noticed or are thinking about with ADUs in suburban areas without alleys on these larger lots, things like that, that you think Josh's project should be looking at, or you think we should be, if Josh's project doesn't look at it, we should be addressing it in your Southeast plan? Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, and this might be more of a question, but when I think of the near southeast area and the suburban context, it seems that there's a lot of opportunity to use basements as an attached ADU, but I'm wondering how the standards are for the access to that. Like, do you have to have a separate door to the exterior, or could it be an interior door? But it seems like near southeast.
Yeah, you would be allowed to have an interior entrance. You do have to have, egress. I mean, the egress windows, fire code requires just safe exit in the case of emergency. But as long as your unit, your basement unit, complies with all of those fire code requirements, you would be able to have an interior entry.
Any other issues or concerns anyone's worried about with ADUs without a alley or anything? Scott, did you have another comment?
I've got another comment if I could add something else.
Yes, go ahead.
So I followed the zoning request for the one that was denied. And I know there were a lot of concerns from the neighbors about having the allowance for a taller structure in the backyard. So it seems like in the suburban context, especially where there are no alleys, and it's less likely that a structure would need to be 2 stories because there's no need to accommodate a garage under.
Right.
It seems like having some sort of ADU zone district that would only allow 1 story could help just ease that transition with bringing more into the suburban context.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're touching on exactly what we're looking at. We're hearing a lot of input moving in that direction from our committee, that something closer to maybe this garage building form allowance feels a little bit more appropriate in the suburban context. And yeah, I mean, I think you're right. A 2-story, it's going to be more expensive to build. It seems like the practical thing to do would be a 1,000 square foot, 1-story structure.
Jared, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify what gets categorized when I was looking at the map between urban edge and suburban. Obviously, those of us who live in the neighborhood would not consider ourselves any more suburban maybe than the northwest part of Denver. But I'm sure that there's experts who are categorizing this correctly. But like my lot size is just under 7,000, so it's not on the 10,000 side. So what is it really the alley access that makes that the difference, or could you help just clarify that a bit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it has to do a lot with built infrastructure, the character, sort of the size of buildings, potentially the shapes of the lots and blocks. So typically urban edge is more gridded, more of a true block, but it has to do with sidewalk infrastructure. Like in urban areas, you get more detached sidewalks with a tree lawn in between the two. And so it really hints to character and place in a way, but it is, it's all kind of fluid. There's not every lot is the same, right? So some places are a blend of the two, but there's no hard and fast rule, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Josh was alluding to there, we have mapped this both in the zoning and in the context designations in Blueprint Denver. But this plan has an opportunity to change contexts for locations. So if, as we're going through this, we decide an area is or should be more suburban or more urban edge, or even one of the other contexts, that's something that could potentially be updated in this plan. So.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's interesting to me, like if you look at kind of the colored map here that he has pulled up, I mean, obviously the area that we're working in has been all zoned as suburban, and yet we're trying to talk about population density and growth here. So it seems to be that those two things might be competing against each other, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, that is part of it, but also the way we define suburban in Blueprint Denver is not necessarily the traditional suburban definition. What we are aiming for, in our future condition is a more urban type of suburban that can accommodate more population, more walkability, all those other things. But it's still, so it'll be sort of a hybrid suburban is our definition of suburban. So yeah, absolutely. Dustin, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of random questions, thoughts, I guess. When they introduced this in 2010 and they put all these rules together, arguably somewhat arbitrary, as many rules can be, was there actually a logic behind all that, or it was just a one-size-all-fits approach? It keeps some people quiet, they won't use it because they're so arbitrary and difficult to use, or was there actually good intent behind those regulations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I was not involved in the process in 2010, but I hope there was good intent involved. But yeah, you're right. I think it is the issue we're running into now is it was basically a one size fits all. So the ADU rules are the same citywide. So that's why this project's looking really closely at modifying those. We really want to right size accessory dwelling units per context. We're kind of hearing that, based on the suburban denial case, that the right size approach doesn't make sense everywhere, doesn't make sense in the suburban context. And so we are looking at, changing those restrictions.
Sounds like it might be easier just to build it from the ground up instead of rehashing what's already there if it's, again, so few people have done it in the last 12 years. The other one, I guess, especially for our end, being the, what you said, average 10,000 odd square foot lots. I mean, if you go ahead with an ADU, you invest in an ADU, then we decide in this plan or whatever, it's, no, we can subdivide the lots. Well, you've dropped a bunch of money into that, but now you could subdivide the lot instead. It's kind of potentially one of those hesitations is, I think my understanding of the minimum lot sizes was to try and prevent developers from capitalizing on the market. Seems somewhat short-sighted now when houses are $1 million in our neighborhood and we've been in here 3 years. So how does that kind of play into it as well, right? Like, are we fixing one, stopgap with ADUs, but actually a lot of these lots could probably be, if both my neighbors joined up, we probably could put in 10 townhouses instead.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it alludes to, sort of this planning process you're undertaking, figuring out what is appropriate as you're in your neighborhood, what type of density feels appropriate. But if that were the case, you would potentially be able to reuse that accessory dwelling unit structure as a primary if it were to meet that lot size requirement. In turn, the use would change. It would become a primary. It would become two primaries ideally. And so I think there's a path to, preserve the accessory dwelling unit if need be, but it's pretty hypothetical.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah, and Dustin, we're also looking at those other options, right? And as we've talked about before, we're looking at how and where to integrate missing middle housing, which includes those townhome options and duplex options and things like that. We're also looking at the minimum lot sizes and seeing if those are appropriate in places, or if there are places where we should look at maybe changing those that could potentially give people an opportunity to subdivide their lot into two lots and create two primary structures. And then if they have ADUs on top of that, then you get two primary structures and two ADUs out of a property that currently houses one family. So those are all part of what we're looking at in this planning effort. I've got Libby working on a map right now, trying to look at those lot size issues. So it's all part of the question that we're trying to answer. All right. Any other issues or concerns about ADUs in suburban? Any other thoughts around the barriers, the financing, the funding, anything like that, that you think the city could or should be doing? Any other ideas that we should be looking at that Josh hasn't mentioned? Anything else? Either something spurred by what Josh has said, or from your experience, or other things you've seen. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I know there have been a few efforts to rezone neighborhoods in larger areas for ADUs, and I just think it would be cool if, out of our effort here, if we could help identify some actionable areas that could be rezoned to lift that burden off of the individual property owners.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we are talking about, is potentially marrying up a neighborhood rezoning with the adoption of this plan, so that as this goes through the adoption process next year, either with it or shortly after, there would be potential rezonings of one or more neighborhoods to allow them ADUs. To that end, as part of our recent surveys, we asked folks, would you like to see your neighborhood rezoned to allow ADUs sooner rather than later? And we've gotten pretty good response on that. Virginia Village is the one that so far seems to be most interested in that. So that may be something that we look at doing as we move forward with the plan process.
I guess just to carry on that one, why the hesitation from the city council not just to blanket do it anyway? Because I assume just because you're zoned to have an ADU, you still have to go through all the approval processes. And it took me 2 months just to get the approvals for my solar panels, which were a rubber stamp design. Presumably an ADU would go through at least the equivalent amount of review and public consultation before it could be done. So why not just tick the box and say, sure, you can apply, you're zoned for it?
Yeah, absolutely. Even with the zoning, you're right, you still need to get a building permit. There's still a process that you have to go through, and permits and fees you have to pay. As far as why we aren't doing it more proactively, we want to make sure that the neighborhoods that do it want to do it. And also we want to address some of these issues that Josh has talked about, that maybe the regulations don't fit right now in the suburban zone district. So we don't want to rezone ahead of that and get things that don't work or create additional problems.
But conversely, you're already putting in an additional roadblock by not just saying, sure, go ahead, and then we'll find more. Again, the limited number of people that have done in the last 10 years, and then, well, my lot, I checked, my lot's not zoned, so now I have to apply to get it rezoned, then I have to apply to get it built. Why not just take that away, and then you're going to shake it out quicker and be like, oh, now everyone's done it. We've got an influx. We've seen as many people apply in the last year as we have the last 10. Oh, here's the problem with all these designs. Good thing Josh is working on this project right now. We can incorporate that into our revision.
Yeah. I mean, you're right that that's what part of what we're trying to do is do it sort of neighborhood by neighborhood instead of citywide, but try to get sort of neighborhoods rezoned entirely so that people don't have to come in individually and rezone their property to allow it. But it just sort of takes time. And again, we want to be able to have that buy-in from the neighborhood. So a lot of these so far have been led by city council members who have had conversations with specific neighborhoods about wanting it in their neighborhoods. And so that's why we're trying to have that conversation as part of this. And then coming out of it, we can do those rezonings, because Josh's project should be adopted just ahead of our plan. So it should resolve a lot of those issues. So in the next year or so, we should be able to rezone some neighborhoods, at least in near Southeast.
Yeah. And I'd just add that, there's still a lot of neighborhoods out there that are opposed, that they do not want ADUs in their neighborhood. So we're battling that discussion and making sure that what we propose feels more appropriate to better fits the context. So.
All right. Probably about time to wrap this up, but any last minute thoughts, questions, or anything around ADUs in your Southeast, or if you have any questions about the citywide project or anything like that, timing, how you can participate. Josh went over all that, but if you want any further questions on that, now's your opportunity. All right. So yeah, as Josh said, there's surveys up now. There will be additional opportunities to participate in that. We're working with Josh to make sure that our recommendations and what's going on there work together so that we can address these issues that we've identified and that come up. So if you have additional things, you can direct them to me, you can direct them to Josh and his project. We will try to get them addressed. Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we had the Virginia Village RNO meeting last night, and we've had a few visually impaired individuals who have said they can't easily access these surveys. So I just wanted to make sure, is there going to be a way for them to easily access this in a way that, is suited for their disability?
Yeah, they should be ADA accessible. So there is an audio readout option as well. Yeah, all of our documentation should comply with accessibility standards.
Sounds good. And Scott, is that the same for the ones on the Southeast area plan? Because I was messing around on it and maybe I just don't know how to access it from an ADA perspective, but are they able to access it that way too for those other ones on our website?
Yeah, they should be able to. As Josh said, we're required to make everything ADA accessible. So they should,
okay,
as far as I know, but if they're having specific issues, they should contact us, or you can contact us, and we're happy to work with them to make sure that they're able to provide their input, because we definitely want to get it.
Okay, yeah, thank you. There might just be, they may be struggling just to access it, but I'll talk to them and see what the issue is.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, so. Yep.
All right. Unless anyone has anything else, thanks, Josh. Really appreciate you coming in and presenting this for us.
Thanks for the feedback. Good discussion, everyone.
All right. Let me go back to my presentation. All right. Now, wanted to give an update on upcoming engagement. So we are sort of wrapping up phase 2 engagement, which is what we launched in late February. We had the workshops in early March. So we're wrapping that phase up and getting ready for the next phase, what we're calling phase 3. We're very good at naming things. So you may recall phase 2 was about coming up with how we want to address the issues. The kickoff phase, phase 1, we sort of tried to identify the issues. Phase 2, we asked how should we be addressing these issues. So now coming out of that phase, what we are doing is working on drafting recommendations to address these issues based on what we've heard. For some of the issues, they're a little more complex or the direction's not as clear. So instead of going straight to recommendations, we will be doing what we call alternatives. And the way it's shaping up right now, these will mostly be focused around sort of growth and where we're directing growth and how that will happen. So we will provide a few different options of where we should be directing additional height in the area, where we should be allowing missing middle and what kinds, where we should be adding new mixed-use centers and things like that. So again, we'll provide a few alternatives for people to evaluate, vote on, provide comments on, with the idea that coming out of that, we will take what works best out of the different alternatives and create a preferred alternative that will go into the plan. We're also creating maps, as we talked about a little bit earlier. We have the context map, the places map in the Blueprint Denver that this plan can update. We'll also likely have a height map in this plan saying what heights are appropriate. So we'll be putting together draft maps for things like that for people to review. We'll also be sharing the focus areas. So again, as we talked about, these are locations within the plan area that need more in-depth recommendations, that need more work. And so there are areas that we sort of want to highlight and say, these are the things that really need to happen here. These are how all the different issues are coming together here and how we should address them. And then we also want to start identifying the transformative projects, which are the big moves that the city can make to, and they'll mostly be tied to those focus areas, to really make a big impact on those focus areas to achieve the community's vision for them. And again, in this section, we're also wanting to start getting into those neighborhood specific issues. So again, every neighborhood will have its own section of the plan. So we want to be able to say, what are the differences between the neighborhoods in these recommendations? So that's what we're working on developing right now, and what we will be sharing with the community in phase 3. So our goals for that phase 3 engagement are to refine those draft recommendations. We want to get feedback on them, make improvements or changes as needed to meet the community's goals. Again, choose that preferred alternative or alternatives based on feedback from the community on what they like or dislike about the different alternative options. Vet those potential projects, update the maps as needed, and then just as we did in phase 2, be clear about where all this fits in the broader process and how we've been using the engagement so far, what we've heard so far. So how we used what we learned in phase 2 to shape these draft recommendations and everything, and how we will use the input from phase 3 going forward into putting together the actual draft plan document, which is what will be the focus of phase 4 coming up later this year. So to do that, we're looking at some similar activities to what we've done so far, likely some online surveys, probably broken out by topic again, like these latest ones were, where people will have an opportunity to read through all those draft recommendations and provide feedback on them, review the alternatives and provide feedback on those, things like that. Also, again, do some community workshops, probably do 2 again, like we did in this last round, except this time looking at doing 1 in person and 1 virtual. So if folks are more comfortable talking to somebody in person, want to come have that experience, we'll provide that opportunity. If folks can't make that work or aren't comfortable in an in-person setting, there'll also be a virtual option for people to participate. We're still figuring out what exactly the activities of those will be, but we're starting to get those planned. And then we're also planning to do some office hours. So because there's going to be more sort of content for people to review a whole bunch of draft recommendations, we want to have opportunities for people to come meet with a planner, ask some questions, learn more about it, have some more detailed conversations if they have questions or concerns about any of the draft recommendations. So for those, we'll likely spend a few hours in the morning or afternoon or whatever in the library or in the rec center, where people can come find us, sit down and have that conversation one-on-one or in a small group about issues. So we'll likely do that instead of sort of the pop-up events that we've done in the last couple of rounds, providing this as an opportunity for those more in-depth conversations. We'll also be doing a second round of focus groups, which these are where we invite some stakeholders and subject matter experts to have sort of detailed in-depth conversations about some of the more technical issues and aspects that the plan needs to address that most of the general public probably doesn't have the level of knowledge or interest or expertise to really provide feedback on. So we want to get the right people in a room to talk about those things. So we'll be scheduling another round of those. And then we want to continue our intentional engagement and navigators. So we are getting the Navigators program up and running, which as a reminder is where we are partnering with some folks in the community who are members of communities or constituencies that we want to make sure that we're engaging. and we're paying them a small stipend to work with us over the remaining course of the planning process to sort of serve as a liaison, make connections, provide a conduit of information between the planning team and the community. And then also continue to do our intentional engagement for, again, those groups, those populations that we're not hearing from and we know don't traditionally participate. So we'll continue to do activities around that. So far, we're working with members of the African Community Center, the First Universalist Church, which has a safe parking space in their parking lot, Oaks Community Church, several renters and schools in the area as part of the Navigator program. Those are the connections we've already made. We're still trying to flesh that out a little bit more, get a few more community navigators on the team. I have these slides in the wrong order. Anyway, so our goals with the intentional engagement, as we've talked about before, is, I was just saying, to engage a diverse population. We want to hear from as many people in the area as possible, and from as wide a range of folks as possible. But to do that, we need to actively target traditionally marginalized or underrepresented communities. So we know there are people who don't usually participate in city processes, who are underrepresented in city government. And so that's where we want to make our additional efforts in engaging them and hearing from them. And then also, as we've talked about, we keep track as much as possible of who we are hearing from, compare that to who we know is in the area, and then use that to additionally target some of our efforts to the folks we know we're not hearing from in the community. So to do that, again, these are some of the organizations we've already started partnering with. We've also made outreach to quite a few other organizations in the area, and some of these provide sort of citywide services, and we're trying to work with them on identifying folks in near Southeast to work with. So these are additional groups we are reaching out to and having conversations with. When we get the navigators on board, and for these other groups, the types of things we're doing to gather feedback, we're scheduling some food truck events where we'll get a food truck to come to an apartment complex or a community center or something, and advertise that as a night folks can come get food, and also provide feedback on the plan and learn about it and things like that. Also, for some of the apartment complexes, we are working with them to gather a group of residents for a meeting to have a discussion around the plan and their issues and concerns. We're also working with the schools to do some events with the kids and also get the parents involved as well. Things like a version of Box City, if anyone's familiar with that, where kids can come and build buildings out of cardboard and then place them within a city to help understand sort of how cities work and grow and things like that. So we're trying to figure out a version of that we can do with some of the elementary schools in the area. And then we're also doing specific outreach with people experiencing homelessness in the area to have those conversations about their issues and what we can do to address their needs better. So that is sort of what is coming up, what we're doing now around intentional engagement, and we'll continue to do over the next few months, and what's coming up with the phase 3 engagement. Our goal right now is to launch that this summer. So we're looking at sort of July timeframe for those community workshops and launching the surveys, and then this work will continue sort of July, August timeframe this summer. So any questions about that? Any thoughts? Any groups that you didn't see on those lists that you think we should be making additional effort to reach out to? Any suggestions on different events we should be doing, anything like that? Spencer, is that your hand up from before? Or do you have another comment?
Still up, my bad.
No problem. Harvey, go ahead.
I noticed a lot of churches. I noticed mosques. I noticed Jewish family services, but I didn't see any Jewish religious organization, any synagogues on the list. There's quite a few within the area. I think there's right now a count of 11 that are actually in the area. The big ones would be BMH, BJ, and Road of Shalom. And I believe Temple Emmanuel would also be, no, Temple Emmanuel is outside the area, but BMH and Road of Shalom would be in the area.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Yeah, as you said, we've worked with Jewish Family Services and the JCC, but I don't know that we have had any luck with the synagogues, but we'll take another look at that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the suggestion.
Scott, I might also say that, as we start to, prepare and schedule, the next set of community meetings and even the office hours that Scott spoke to, if anyone on the steering committee has any ideas of potentially where we can hold those meetings, I think we're all ears and we're always kind of looking for suggestions. I think, one thing we're trying to do is just make this process as accessible as possible and get as many folks as we can to participate. And so we realize that involves going into the community, and that might mean, meeting in an apartment building or, meeting out somewhere, outside in the community. So just kind of throw that out there now. We don't necessarily have to talk about it today, but as Scott mentioned, we will be scheduling these here, pretty soon. And so just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. If there are certain locations that you think we should visit, I think that we're more than happy to accommodate that.
Maybe I missed this one or not, but on that, what about some of the larger office areas or spaces in the area? So I think, was it last time we kind of discussed what we'd like to see near Colorado and 25, and it's got that, I forget the name, whatever insurance company is there, and the Dave and Buster's. So in terms of like office hours as opposed to just like library and rec centers, what about commercial centers?
Yeah, great. That's exactly the kind of suggestions we're looking for. Thanks.
And I see Jared has a suggestion for Zadie's Deli. So yeah, that's another, great, local place that we'd love to visit. So any more ideas, we're happy to hear them.
All right. Any other questions about the upcoming activities or the goals for phase 3 timing, anything like that? All right. So yeah, as Jason said, we're going to work on getting this stuff scheduled here over the next few weeks so that we can sort of launch it in July. So if anyone thinks of anything, any groups that we should reach out to or organizations, anywhere you think we should be doing office hours or potential locations for community workshops or anything like that, please let us know. We're looking to get all of those scheduled. All right. So now wanted to talk a few landscaping issues. Hopefully this is a little lighter and fun. We ran out of time back in February. I think we had some of these questions queued up, but didn't get to them. And then as we've started looking at the community feedback, wanted to get some of your input on what we're seeing here. So what I have here is a few of the questions from the survey with what we've gotten from the community so far. So I'd like to get your take. So this is, if you've taken the survey, you may recognize this question, asking folks which types of landscaping they would like to see more of in near Southeast. And as you can see, the options that, so the responses are up here in the chart, and then the numbers or the photos that folks were voting on. So you can see the things people liked are 8, 6, and 2 are the ones that got the most votes. 5 is up there as well. So you can see there's sort of a split between what we're seeing, which is 6 and 8 are very sort of natural. They both have water in them. That may be a factor. Whereas 2 and 5 are more sort of formal and sort of linear in the way they're laid out. So any thoughts on which you all like, or any help in us sort of parsing what we're seeing from the community here and understanding what the aspects of these or the individual elements of these that you think people are responding to that we should be looking at for landscape suggestions in near Southeast? Dustin, go ahead.
I actually interpret those results slightly different to how you do. Obviously the 8, 6, and 2 seem to be the highest, but 5 and 7 are fairly up there as well. And when I look at 5, 6, 7, 8, I see more natural and sort of drought resistant might be the wrong terminology, but at least in 5, there's a lot of mulch there, right? So trying to be water conscious as opposed to 3 and maybe 1 or definitely 4. So I would, from my perspective, it looks like most people are trying to be a bit more conscious about our environment and what the landscaping should look like. Number 2, definitely more manicured, but also that's a very small median. So maybe it's like a little bit of that's might not going to help, but that's kind of how I interpret these. At least, especially with 4 being the greenest and probably the most water intensive of the lot, being, you know, even behind 9, which I'm not going to lie, 9 looks kind of hideous and like someone started building something and then gave up. So that's just my interpretation of what these responses are, and that, you know, also somewhat aligns with what I would like to see more of.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's really helpful to get that perspective. That I hadn't really thought about it that way. So that's exactly the kind of help we want. Lisa had her hand up, but it looks like she put it down. So Harvey, go ahead.
I've been around a little while. Landscape number 2. Do we know who's taking care of this? Who's going to maintain these in this condition? Because landscaping like this has gone up on Quebec, close to Alameda. We have some of that coming up Monaco, and it's all dead. Oh, and along Alameda also, and it's all dead. So putting it in is a great idea, but if there's no maintenance or low maintenance, it's going to look like number 9 when we're done anyway. Yeah,
absolutely. Great point. That whatever we do needs to be paired with maintenance and something that can be maintained in this climate and in conditions. So excellent points. Erica.
I think a little bit of what everybody's saying. I think I just saw what Lisa put in the comment too, but I immediately gravitated towards number 2, basically because of the median on Quebec. But alternatively, I don't like how manicured it is. I like more of like number 6. So I want medians that look nice, but maybe with more natural things that come from Colorado. So maybe people were gravitating towards those 2 ideas if you were to combine them. So I agree. I think more water conscious design. But I think it would be nice if all of these little spaces had something. And I do agree that we need more maintenance, but hey, there's job creation. So that's all I had to say.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and that's a good interpretation as well, that people want what they're responding to in 2 is just the fact that it is median landscape that they want to see. But what, in terms of plants, what they're gravitating to is more 6, 8, 7. Again, I saw Spencer had his hand up, but it seems like he put it down. So Councilwoman Black.
Thanks, Scott. I just wanted to remind people that we are not putting water in medians anymore. It's just an unsustainable practice. And Erica, you mentioned job creation. The problem now is we have more jobs than we have people to do the jobs. And you're right, our medians don't look good. And I've asked for money in next year's budget for more money to maintain mediums, but it's really not a good use of city resources to water and spend the human resources and the funds to maintain medians, especially in this climate. That's it.
Thanks, Councilwoman. So yeah, maybe we should be aiming for something that doesn't need maintenance. So again, these more native plants that could sort of survive on their own without additional water or much maintenance. Judy, go ahead.
I agree with what Kendra said. And also, I would say too, here on where we live in Indian Creek, between Cherry Creek South Drive and on up to Leetsdale, part of Quebec is in unincorporated Arapahoe County. So you'd be sharing the maintenance or the idea behind that with another county. So just a comment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Good point. We'd have to work with Arapahoe County on improvements on Quebec if they wanted to be consistent through there. I see Spencer's point he put in the comments. Looking at something like we had just been talking about on Holly as well. So thanks for that. Any other thoughts around landscaping in types of plants folks would like to see in near Southeast? All right, moving on to the next one. So now thinking about where we should be focusing, adding this type of landscaping, where we settle on as the type of landscaping we want to see. Where's it most important to add that? So it sounds like similar to what you all have been saying, the community most interested in adding this along major streets like Quebec. And then following that, there's a fairly big drop. The remainder are all kind of close there with the walking and biking routes to parks, trails, and other destinations, and within the parks themselves, getting the next highest number of votes. So yeah, again, this sort of matches up with the conversations we've just been having, but I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to add or questions about this one. Go ahead, Jared.
Well, it seems that Councilwoman Black just pointed out, like major streets medians are not going to get landscaping. So maybe sooner than later, taking that off the survey would be appropriate. And I mean, it's interesting. It just feels like it's always this kind of this double standard, which is like we're trying to move people away from automobiles, but make the places where we drive automobiles look better. So at some point, you kind of have to count your losses. I would much rather see us prioritize parks and increase kind of those green spaces that people are sharing for landscaping purposes, rather than trying to make everybody feel better when they're driving around their cars. But I'm just getting a little spicy at 7:22.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. I will say there's landscaping we can add along streets, not in medians, right? We could do it along the sides as well. And that also has the benefit of making those more pleasant for walking, right? So, but I totally get your point that yeah, we should be concentrating this where people will most enjoy it. That's a good point.
Although Councilwoman Black said that they weren't going to add water to medians. She didn't say they couldn't be landscaped. Like if they don't need water, maybe if they could have something that's, just thrives in our natural environment, maybe without water.
Right. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff we can look at.
If anybody knows what that plant is that thrives in our natural environment without any water year round, I would love to know so I can plant it in my yard.
Yeah, we can hopefully figure that out. And something that is a native species that's not a Russian olive or a tamarisk or something that's causing additional problems. Judy, go ahead.
We do have can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
There is an area here on Quebec near me, and that area is owned by the people that own the lots, but they're not really keeping it up, and it looks terrible. It's between the Place Middle School and Arkansas. And it's really bad. It's a disgrace. So somehow or another, I don't know how you work with the homeowners, but I did do some checking on this, and it is owned by the homeowners. So something really needs to be done there, I think, and I don't know how you handle it.
Yeah. Typically the adjacent property owners are responsible for maintaining the landscaping along the street adjacent to their property. That is something we're also looking at, is how we can help people better maintain their what landscaping they do have, or get the appropriate landscaping in place. Councilman Cashman put a comment in the chat around partnering with Denver Water to incentivize people to replace turf and other unsustainable landscape options with xeric and other more sustainable options. So things like that, where we can work with property owners to help them get the right things in place and then maintain them.
These are trees and what have you that have grown over the fences. I think most of them are Russian olives.
Yeah, and if they, if it gets to a certain point, you can call 311 to make a complaint, and neighborhood inspection services can come out, and if they are, getting to the point where they're violating code, then we'll work with them that way. So if it really becomes an issue, call 311.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Councilwoman Black.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify, there's actually not any native plants that don't require maintenance. So even if we put, no irrigation and we planted xeric plants in the median, it still requires maintenance. And currently the maintenance is part of the parks budget. And I don't believe that the Parks Department should be paying to maintain medians. They should be paying, maintaining our parks and not medians. So anyway, there's no such thing as a maintenance-free landscaping at all. But one of the things that our climate office, and I know all the council members really care about, is our tree canopy. And we really want to add more trees throughout our city. Trees are not native to Denver, so they all have to be planted and pampered and watered, but they're an important part of our strategy to combat our heat island and also climate change. So I think any trees we can get that has somebody to care for them are really, really important, but probably not in medians.
Okay, great points. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it looks like there's some more information in the chat around water and planting and things like that. So check that out. Any other thoughts on this one around where we should be focusing our landscape efforts? All right. Last one on this is looking at potential benefits of landscaping and green infrastructure and what people value most, where we should be sort of focusing our efforts. And so similar to what we've been talking about, sort of that look and feel and also reducing water use have scored high. We've been sort of surprised by the response around the habitat for wildlife and pollinators that got such a strong response on this. And then again, if you remember the survey, we asked folks to tell us, put a pin on a map where there's existing habitat or where they'd like to see habitat for wildlife and pollinators. And that is by far our most popular map question. We've gotten nearly 200 pins on that map of folks telling us where they'd like to see habitat. So we've been a little surprised by how strong that response is, but it's great that people are passionate about it. So yeah, any thoughts on this issue? Judy.
Actually, the area along Cherry Creek where they went in and redid all of the banks and what have you, there was a lot of wildlife there. And I know now they're got it such so they're trying to get the grass and some of the green to come back. But we had a lot of wildlife. And unfortunately, they're gone now, but it would really be nice if we could do the landscaping so it could bring some of the wildlife back.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that landscaping, should be coming in this summer, right? They, I assume, planted it, so it'd take off this spring and summer. So hopefully that will bounce back quickly. Any other thoughts around benefits to landscaping or any insight into this strong response around habitat? Yeah, Jared shared a comment around the baby geese at Lollipop Lake. I haven't seen those, but I was just walking on the Cherry Creek Trail the other day and saw multiple baby geese and their parents making sure I didn't get too close. So it's always very nice to see. Jenny?
I don't know if this provides any useful insight, but I checked the Better Habitat for Wildlife and Pollinators, but specifically for pollinators. I see enough wildlife in my backyard that I don't want there. But I'd love to see more habitat for pollinators. So that might be the driving force. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting looking at the map response. There's a lot of it along Cherry Creek where you would expect it, and in the parks and along Highline Canal. But then there's a lot of pins just dropped all over the neighborhoods. So that may be what it is that people want to see more pollinator-friendly plants in people's yards and things like that. Yeah, we can check with Sensoray. We're working with Mallory Roybal is our main contact with parks, so we've been working with her. But but we can make sure we're getting the right feedback from parks on that stuff too. All right. If there's nothing else on this, we'll move on. Okay. All right, so that was it for the landscaping questions. So now, after last month's meeting, sent out the poll asking folks what they were interested in terms of continuing to meet virtually or having in-person meetings. So here you can see the results from that survey. The first one asking for these steering committee meetings, how people would like to do those. The most common response there, the green, is continuing to meet virtually, but offer additional separate meetings where people can get together in person. But also got quite a few for alternating between virtual and in person. Some folks wanting to continue virtually for now, but reassess again later. And then a couple of folks wanting to stay only virtual, and a couple of folks wanting to go only to in person. So I don't know if anyone has anything they'd like to share about that. Seems like, again, the largest section is leaning towards continuing with the virtual meetings. If you look at sort of these first three combined, that makes a majority of continuing the virtual meetings and then offering some alternative. Yeah, any thoughts or feedback on this one?
I guess virtual is definitely a lot more convenient. Don't have to leave the house. I guess if you did go to in person of some description, I mean, where would it be held? Downtown, because that would be infinitely worse in my opinion. Or would we rent a space closer to where everyone in this committee lives?
Yeah, if we were going to do in-person meetings, we try to find a space in the community to have them, potentially the rec center or the library or somewhere where we could get hopefully a free space and wouldn't have to pay for it. Or but that would be something we would have to figure out. We don't want you all to have to come down to downtown to our offices for these. We would try to do it in the community.
Yeah, it seems to be information communication works just as well virtually. I think being in the neighborhood for like the walking tours and trying to do some of those kind of more community engagement type things seem to be much more effective in person. So that was the one that I picked, was keep the meetings virtual. Let's see if we can meet up together in person for some more engaged activity in the community.
All right. So yeah, that seems to be the sort of most popular option. So I don't know if anyone has any objections to that. Anyone feels strongly about meeting in person that they'd like to share? Okay. So yeah, I guess we'll continue with the virtual meetings now. We can and look at some in-person options aside from our regular monthly steering committee meetings. So on that note, the second and third questions asked about what folks would be comfortable with. So first one, in terms of another walking or biking tour, it seems like pretty positive response to that. Most folks said yes, and a few folks said maybe. Nobody said no. So we can definitely look at getting another one of those scheduled. Now that we're getting into summer, we'll have the opposite problem of the first one, where it may be unpleasantly hot when we try to schedule this instead of cold. But we can, as we are getting into the details here, we can pick out some locations that will let us have some in-depth conversations around some of the issues we're addressing. So any thoughts around a walking or biking tour, anything specific folks would like to see or visit on a tour that we set up? Besides Esther's, it seems like that's what folks are asking for in the chat. Councilman Cashman.
Yeah, I wasn't on the first tour, so I don't know what your itinerary was, but I'd love to perhaps the Cherry Creek Greenway and parks in the district.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the first one we started at the post office at Holly and Evans, went up Evans to Florida, Florida over to Monaco, Monaco back down to Evans, and Evans back to the post office. So caught Ash Grove and Cook Park, but didn't really get to, we could sort of see Cherry Creek, but didn't really get to it. So yeah, that would be a good suggestion. All right. So yeah, we'll work on getting one of those scheduled here, and then also looking at some other in-person option, and this could be either a work session, or it could be a purely social thing, or some combination of the two, or we could do a tour and end up somewhere like Esther's and have a happy hour after the tour. But slightly less interest in this. One person, it looks like, changed their vote from a yes to a maybe, but still pretty positive on folks being interested in some type of other in-person meeting. So yeah, any ideas for, obviously Esther's, as I mentioned, is coming up, but any other ideas for things we could do, or places we can meet, or something other than just going somewhere and having a happy hour? If there are other suggestions, we're open to them. Okay, Jenny.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Junction might be a fun place to go to, and with that, kind of bringing the focus more into my neighborhood. We're having our neighborhood annual neighborhood meeting tomorrow in University Hills North, and I've been doing some research on development that's up and coming in our neighborhood, and it's all along. But it's kind of hopefully transit oriented, but it's all, I think, basically because of the Colorado Light Rail Station there. And that area is such a huge area of change right now that it might not be a bad idea to walk through that I-lift to Evans area of University Hills North, Colorado to I-25, to just get a view of all that's happening. There's a lot happening.
Yeah.
And this plan is unfortunately a little late for our neighborhood, but at least we can see how a plan could be useful for a neighborhood like mine.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, great suggestion. Thanks. Erica.
I was trying to think where we could walk in my area, which is Goldsmith, and end up somewhere. We could go to Benihana. I think that's the only restaurant technically within walking distance of my house at this point, which demonstrates the need for more restaurants. So.
We could brave the walk to Esther's from here, but that would involve Quebec and possibly Evans, unless we went to Jewel.
I didn't realize that Benihana was still there. I thought when Tamarack Square got redeveloped, it went away.
Oh, it's there.
Wow.
There.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be fun, right? Everyone likes Benihana. All right. Any other ideas or suggestions for tours or other places to meet, or other activities to do besides a tour or a happy hour? Let's see, we got Comrade Brewing as a suggestion in the chat, and then Councilwoman Black offering to reserve a section of Junction. That would be a good option too, if we want to do Jenny's suggestion and end up at Junction.
I was just throwing out the idea of Comrade because we were talking about Benihana's and Comrade's right there. And Comrade's arguably one of the best breweries in the entire city.
And that would be a real fun walking experience.
Right.
Yeah, we'll save the drinking for after the tour, I think. But yeah, that's another good suggestion.
Just as long as we don't end up at Dirty Duck.
I've heard a little bit about Dirty Duck, but I've never been there myself. So
it's an experience to say the least.
Yeah, that's the impression I've gotten. All right. So yeah, we will try to get some things scheduled. So maybe it's a couple tours ending in happy hours. Maybe it's a tour and a happy hour or something like that. We'll get some ideas figured out and probably send out a doodle poll to find a date that works for most folks for doing something like that. All right. That's all I had on the agenda for tonight. So if anyone has any other issues they want to bring up or any
You
questions?
have one not necessarily related to this, but for both our council people in the meeting, especially since we just morbidly joked about walking around the neighborhoods. And it's just on the topic of traffic enforcement. It seems like no one wants to obey the road rules anymore. Every other day on Nextdoor, someone's been T-boned, hit. I didn't witness it, but I drove past the aftermath of that person who was run over on Colorado the other day. So is anything going to happen with that? Or are we just going to ignore traffic lights from here on out?
Yeah, I mean, we are working on improving it. It's part of our Vision Zero goal to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries from traffic incidents. And part of what we're looking at in this plan is how we can make things safer. I can't speak much to enforcement, but what we look more at is designing our roads and our crossings so that they're safer and people obey the speed limit, right? If we design the streets appropriately, people will drive, more likely to drive a safe speed. So we're, again, in the plan, we're sort of taking the long-term view. How can we, over the next 20 years, improve the safety? But obviously there's immediate things we need to do.
Yeah. Some of us might not see that 20 years at the current rate.
Exactly. So yeah, I don't know if looks like Councilman Cashman might have something to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I certainly appreciate the frustration with traffic enforcement. Our police department is down 150 cops right now, doing their best to get back up to authorized strength. We just started an academy class of about 50 new officers. So hopefully in the next 6 months to a year, we'll be better able to enforce. But right now, I can tell you that our police department is focused on all areas of crime, especially violent crime, and hopefully we'll be able to get back to a stronger enforcement of our traffic laws.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Councilman Cashman. And good question, Dustin. Yeah, that's, again, something we've heard a lot in the surveys, people concerned about speeding and unsafe traffic. So certainly something we will look to address in the plan.
So more of a planning one, I was going to email you about it. If we do want some traffic management, traffic calming stuff done sooner rather than later, what's the best way to go about that? Is it to speak to the council people? Is there something, petition the neighborhood? We actually want something done now. What's the best way to do?
Yeah, there's a few things. Talking to your council member is good. You can putting in requests in 311 and Pocket Gov, because all that data gets correlated. And so if we see a whole bunch of people saying this intersection needs help, that will spur Dottie to be more likely to act on it. And then, yeah, also getting the neighborhood together and saying, we want to make something happen here. This is our priority. So all of those are good options. Okay. Thanks, everyone, for good discussions tonight. We will be back June 8th, I believe, is our next scheduled meeting, where we'll hope to have an opportunity to review some of the draft recommendations and alternatives that we're putting together. So that's our goal for next month, is to have some stuff for you all to review before it goes out to the public. And we will be in touch about tours and other activities, so we can get together in person. If you have any other questions or comments, feel free to contact us about those. Thanks, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks, y'all.